Hey y'all, Bohemian Trap City here. Thought I'll switch it up a little bit. I'm just gonna do a vlog, a little flow of consciousness, whatever comes to mind. Maybe do vlogs periodically. So to start, I was thinking this week, and being an introvert, things just cross your mind sometimes like that. So if you look like at a freight train, right, and you see it all be spotted with like oil and grit and just emissions that settle on it, and sunburnt paint. It's a machine that travels millions of miles per year and technically gets worked on as it's rolling. Ideally no downtime, and it is shows what it is. But then if you look at another uh, load bearer of industry, such as a truck, and it's taken care of, no real oil spots, paint's not sunburnt generally, and it's really a luxury interior comfort. And so if you just juxtapose those, it's a minimal connection, but just to point some things out, it's so one is like mode of transport is generally corporate owned, others generally private, and just the way that those two things probably take the same amount of maintenance, but have different things to show for it. And I guess one of them is more forgiving for downtime. Second, the term stain, like you stain something and it can make it better, can make it weatherproof, can improve its physical attractiveness. But then you stain your clothes and you're upset. So the point was that dyeing your clothes is technically permanently staining it. Not saying that you should switch up your red shirt for soft stained shirt, but just something, a little quirk, kind of interest. A machine, like, so if, let's say that you have a small explosion or you hit something with a hammer and it gets launched. For a workshop, that's kind of a bit of a mishap. Can ruin a day. But then you have a small explosion and you put it in a setting that won't get ruined immediately, and you have it acting on a piston, connecting rod, uh, needle rod, and shackled to a crankshaft. Um, and suddenly you have useful work coming out of that. So something uncontrolled suddenly becomes controlled and useful. Another one is so there's an argument for I can make that, like, what is really like active or on. So I argue that a mechanical device is not can be termed to be really on, because if any piece in the chain of events is missing, such as if you look at an engine, if your piston moves up, valve doesn't open, uh, spark plug doesn't fire, the machine is not on. And any one of those can throw off the function of the machine. And so no matter how many times you hit the start switch, you're just not going to get a mechanism that's on, or a mechanism at all, really, because you need that chain of events. But then something as simple, a simple mechanical device or a utility such as a toilet, you can say that's on, because once you hit that lever, water just cascades down once the trap opens. So you can have one of two events: either the trap opens with the push of a lever, or it doesn't. And so you don't have that in between state of the device not being on, essentially. And I know about clogged toilets, so no need to mention that. But then, like, something that's more actually like complex even, or like electronic, then you could say the device once again can be on, because the chain of events is so integral that if you have a break in that circuit, even though if it's really complicated, it's just not gonna be on unless you have the connection to the anode or the ground. Not trying to be scientific, just sort of rhetoric. Um, so I think like philosophically, like people's industry really had an impact on philosophy. So we have like machinery now, but like 1,000 years ago we didn't. So the things that they would contemplate were more simpler, but still paradoxical, such as if you have a vase, are you buying the vessel? Because the only thing that's useful is the space in the vessel. So technically, you're buying the space in the vessel. You pour water, you put a flower. The vessel holds the water, but essentially, you just need something to hold the water. So you're. So the question is like um, just a question of object, whether what type of object is a vase or an urn. It just is the space inside. It's not. Probably not making as profound as like the Eastern philosophies did, but that was something to bring up. Moving on, so like I just like those paradoxes. Like in bicycles, if you're familiar with the spoked wheel, and that was invented in about the 18th century in France. You have a spoked wheel, and this is actually an ingenious device. But before you had like an integrated spoked like carriage wheel, and in those instances, they just found out that a pretty much a like a wooden beam or something that's really not load bearing by itself can, if placed in a circular frame, the two or three spokes that are sitting at the lowest point can bear the weight of the of whatever you're trying to transport. But a bike wheel, a few people realize, is not the same concept because a bike wheel is not holding you up. What's happening is the bike wheel suspends you above ground by the spokes that are immediately above the axle. And they can be laced different. And there's some interesting things in the way that they've devised to lace those, but essentially it's the same thing. It's a suspension mechanism. It's not a load-bearing mechanism. So if you ever check like your bike, if you're sitting on top of your bike, you check the spokes on top. They're taut, but the spokes on bottom are actually loose. That's how that works. Another point of interest, recently I was, there's a term called recollectance, rectalescence, I'm sorry. The term is, found this a long time ago, that if you're making alloyed metals, and there's a term in chemistry called exogenic or endogenic. I'm sorry, endothermic or exothermic reaction, and making an alloy metal is a exothermic reaction after you get melted, of course, because once it's cooling down, it begins to crystallize and form various types of alloys. There are some alloys which, if you're looking at their cooling curve, which is generally has to do with the natural logarithm, they cool kind of natural logarithmic. Don't quote me on that. Once again, not being scientific, but being rhetorical. There's certain alloys that, as they reach a certain cooling point, heat back up, and it's kind of interesting to think about, simply because there's a curve for crystallization and there's a curve for cooling. Once the crystal forming is basically once the system, and I don't want to use any compare like anthropomorphize a reaction, but once the system realizes that it's not gonna, this is not realizes, this is take that with some doubt is what I'm saying, but let's say once it starts to realize that it's not going to crystallize by the time that it gets to room temperature or whatever temperature it's going to get to, it heats back up. It's sort of a trickery on the part of nature that it goes back up to allow for specifically for that time to fulfill that reaction where the metal is going to be a stable alloy, which is kind of neat. And specifically, the term that this arises in is once again alloy metallurgy, and the two slopes that I'm talking about are called the phase diagram, the points at which different chemicals are in different states. And so, hopefully, you found this vlog interesting, and we will return.